Hello, please. Today we're going to talk about a question most people avoid. In this video, we'll explore why some authoritarian leaders manage to deliver economic miracles, why others brought only ruin, fear, and silence, and most importantly, why democracy, despite all its flaws, remains the system that survives in the long run. So sit back, focus, and let's dive in. Do good dictators exist? Democracy and authoritarianism in the modern world. The history of politics has always been a struggle of ideas, freedom or order, democracy or dictatorship, chaos or discipline. From childhood, we were taught democracy is good, dictatorship is evil. But is it really that black and white? In 1992, American political scientist Francis Fukuyama published The End of History and the Last Man. In it, he argued that with the collapse of the USSR, the world would eventually converge on a single form of government, liberal democracy. At the time, it seemed he was right. Communism was shattered. Dictatorships in Africa, Asia, and Latin America were weakening. The future appeared clear. One day, all nations would become democracies. But the world went a different way, and this path turned out to be far more complicated than political idealists had imagined. Democracy versus authoritarianism, statistics and facts. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the difference was obvious. Democracies developed faster. Their GDP grew on average 2% per year, while dictatorships grew less than 1%. Freedom and economic progress seemed to go hand in hand. But after World War II, the picture changed. Since 1950, democracies have grown at an average of 2.4% per year, while authoritarian states grew at 2%. The gap nearly disappeared. This forced the world to reconsider, is democracy truly the only path to prosperity? A quick glance at the richest nations shows that the top 20 are almost entirely democracies. Luxembourg, Ireland, Switzerland, Norway, the USA. The claim of democracy's supporters holds weight. Not all democracies are successful, but all successful countries are democracies. The world today. Today, the average income in democratic countries is over $20,000 per capita, while in authoritarian ones, it's around $8,000. Of the roughly 8 billion people in the world, 1.2 billion live in free democracies, 2.3 billion in hybrid regimes, more than 4 billion under dictatorships. As of 2022, there are 73 democracies worldwide. 34 countries are hybrid regimes with elections but little real freedom. And 59 states are outright autocracies. The numbers look like this. 12.6% of the world's countries are full democracies, 31.7% flawed democracies, 20.4% hybrid regimes, 35.3% authoritarian states. That means over a third of humanity lives under dictatorship, and the trend of recent years suggests authoritarianism is not fading. On the contrary, it's gaining strength. Since 2016, the United States has officially been classified as a flawed democracy. India, the world's largest democracy, is slowly drifting toward authoritarian rule. If that happens, more than 70% of the world's population will live under autocrats. We are not living in the end of history, but in an era of the return of dictatorships. What is democracy's advantage? The argument in favor of democracy is simple but fundamental. Feedback between power and society. In a democracy, there are elections. Power depends on the electorate. If a politician fails, he can be removed. This doesn't guarantee perfect leaders, but it creates a mechanism of correction. In a dictatorship, things are different. Power rests not on the people, but on elites. The army, the party, a narrow circle of allies. This is the selectorate that decides a ruler's fate. As a result, the interests of society are often ignored, but sometimes there are exceptions, and these exceptions raise the question, do good dictators exist? Good dictators, myth or reality? Most dictatorships are about fear, repression, ruin. Stalin, Pol Pot, their names became symbols of terror. They justified millions of deaths with great goals. The result is always overshadowed by the cost, but history knows a few leaders who used authoritarian power for development. Rare, but they existed. Park Chung-hee, the architect of the Korean miracle. In 1961, General Park Chung-hee seized power in South Korea after a military coup. The country was one of the poorest in the world, with GDP per capita under $100. For comparison, in the US, it was over $3,000. The gap was enormous. He promised temporary order but ruled for nearly 2 decades. His style, strict control, centralized planning, 5-year economic plans. The state supported a dozen corporations with loans, privileges, technology, and international contracts. Among them, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, then Gold Star, Daewoo, SK Group. In exchange, the government demanded results: industrial growth, exports, jobs. It was a kind of contract. The state gives support, business delivers development. During his rule, South Korea's economy grew 15-fold, from $4 billion to $66 billion. GDP per capita rose from $100 to $1,700. From poverty, Korea became an industrial giant. Yes, he repressed opponents and curtailed freedoms, but history remembers him as the father of the Korean economic miracle. The cost: political repression, censorship, controlled elections, grueling labor conditions, and violent suppression of protests. Park himself was assassinated in 1979 by one of his aides. Kuan Yew, the maker of Singapore. 31 years in power, a tiny island nation with no resources. The result, one of the richest financial hubs in the world. Kuan Yew built Singapore on 3 principles: openness to global capital, strict anti-corruption policies, meritocracy, promoting the most capable, regardless of background. He concentrated power, but aligned elite interests with societies. Singapore became an exception, an effective dictatorship. Results: 1959 to 1990. GDP per capita rose from $400 in 1960 to over $12,000 in 1990, and by 2020 exceeded $66,000. Average annual GDP growth in the first 20 years, 9 to 10%. Singapore entered the top 10 wealthiest nations. The cost: one-party rule, censorship, curbs on free speech, harsh laws, including death penalty for drugs, and social engineering. Augusto Pinochet, Chile's controversial experiment. In 1973, General Pinochet seized power in Chile. His Chicago Boys economists imposed radical liberal reforms: privatization, deregulation, opening to capital. Results: 1973 to 1990. GDP doubled from $16 billion to $33 billion. Exports grew from $1.3 billion to $8 billion. Inflation dropped more than 20-fold. Poverty fell from 50% to 33%. But crises struck. In 1982, GDP collapsed 14%. Unemployment hit 30%. Repression claimed thousands of lives. Uniquely, Pinochet was ousted not by revolution, but by referendum. In 1988, Chileans voted no to his rule, and the country returned peacefully to democracy. The line between success and sacrifice. Yes, some dictators brought development, but what matters more, the outcome or the cost? Stalin left nuclear weapons, but millions of corpses. Chung-hee created an economic miracle, but crushed freedom. Kuan Yew lifted Singapore, but closed the political system. The conclusion is simple. A good dictatorship is possible only if development is achieved without mass sacrifice. But that is the exception, not the rule. Why democracy wins in the long run. Dictatorship can deliver a quick leap, but it almost always depends on a single person. When the dictator dies, the system collapses. Democracy is slow. It often looks chaotic, flawed, corrupt. But it has the one thing that matters most: a mechanism of renewal. It can learn from its mistakes. Authoritarianism lacks this mechanism. It can create a miracle, but it cannot guarantee the future. Conclusion. Do good dictators exist? Yes, but they are rare. Is democracy perfect? No, it is chaotic and flawed. But if we ask, which system gives the best chance for stable development, freedom, and fairness in the long run, the answer remains the same: democracy. Because only democracy ensures feedback between power and society. Only democracy allows rules to change peacefully, without blood. And only democracy leaves the next generations a chance to live better than we do.